All right, diving in today, folks. We're going to tackle Smith & Wesson.
Big one.
Yeah, I mean, for a good chunk of history, they were the name in pistols.
Yeah.
Everybody wanted one.
Yeah.
So we've got this awesome historical outline, kind of lays out their whole journey, from the start all the way up to now.
It's really comprehensive.
It is, yeah. And what we're going to do is we're going to pick it apart. We're going to try to figure out what were the big moments.
Yeah.
What were those key innovations? What decisions did they make that put them on top, like way above everybody else making pistols for decades?
Yeah, absolutely. It's not just about like a list of models they made, dates and stuff. It's like, what was their secret sauce? What did they get that everyone else wasn't quite getting?
Right. It's like, how did they become the gold standard?
Exactly.
Okay, so Smith & Wesson, it wasn't like some overnight thing. It all started with these two guys, Horace Smith and Daniel B. Wesson. Mm-hmm. And they both had their own, unique backgrounds that I think really played a big role. So Horace Smith, he cut his teeth, so to speak, at the National Armory.
Ah, yeah. Huge. That's not just any old workshop.
Oh, no, definitely not. So what was it about the National Armory that, gave him an advantage?
Okay, so think about it. National Armory, back then, that was the top of the line for manufacturing in America.
Like the best of the best.
Yeah. And that's where Smith really learned about mass production, how to crank out a ton of guns. And not just any old guns. These were standardized, interchangeable parts, the whole 9 yards.
So consistency.
Exactly. They could make a bunch of guns and all the parts would fit perfectly. And, when you can do that, you can make them faster, cheaper, and they're going to work better. And a lot of smaller gunsmiths back then, that just wasn't happening.
They couldn't compete with that kind of scale. So you've got that mass production side, thanks to Smith. But then you've got Wesson, and he came from a totally different world, right? He was working with his brother making target rifles.
Yeah, and that's super important too, because think about who buys target rifles.
People who really care about accuracy.
Exactly. Super picky customers, right?
Yeah.
So Wesson, he learned firsthand what these guys wanted, how the gun felt, how it balanced, how accurate it was. It's he had his finger on the pulse of what shooters actually needed, Stuff that maybe a guy focused only on cranking out a ton of guns wouldn't pick up on.
That makes sense. One guy's focused on the big picture and the other's focused on the details.
Yeah, like a perfect partnership. Right.
Like two sides of the same coin.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems like they had this really clear goal from the get-go. What was it that they were ultimately trying to do?
It sounds simple, but they just wanted to make better guns. They looked around and thought, we can do this better. More reliable, easier to use, just straight up better technology.
So they weren't just content with what was already out there.
No way. They wanted to push the envelope. And their first big swing at it was this thing called the Volcanic Repeating Arms Company. Which, you think Smith & Wesson, you think revolvers, but this wasn't a revolver, right? This was a lever-action pistol.
Yeah, lever-action pistol. So what was the thinking behind the Volcanic? What made it different?
Okay, so the Volcanic, this was a real game changer, at least in theory. So it was a lever action, right, like you'd see on a Winchester rifle later. But it used these self-contained cartridges called rocket balls. And that was way ahead of its time. Most pistols back then, you had to load them individually, powder, bullet, the whole deal.
Yeah, super slow.
Right. But the Volcanic, it had this tubular magazine, held a bunch of these rocket balls. The pocket pistol could hold, 10 rounds? And the carbines, they could hold, 18 to 30 rounds.
Whoa, that's an insane amount of firepower for back then.
Yeah, I mean, imagine rolling up on somebody with that back in the 1850s. It should have been a smash hit, right?
You'd think so.
Ew.
But it wasn't, was it? What happened?
The problem was the rocket balls themselves. They were cool, self-contained, all that, but they were weak, seriously underpowered.
Oh, so all the innovation in the world doesn't matter if the basic ammo's no good.
Exactly. It's like having a Ferrari with a lawnmower engine. So the Volcanic, it just didn't have the punch to make it a real contender.
So it was a flop.
Pretty much, yeah. They had to sell the company. But here's the crazy part.
Okay.
The guy who bought it, Oliver Winchester.
No way.
Yeah, and Winchester, he took that lever action design, tweaked it, refined it, and boom, the Winchester rifle.
The gun that won the West.
Exactly. So even though the Volcanic was a bust for Smith & Wesson, you can argue that their early work on repeating mechanisms, it really shaped the future of firearms.
It's like their failure kind of spawned an icon?
Yeah, it's wild, right? So, okay, Volcanic's done. But Smith & Wesson, they weren't quitters. They teamed up again, this time in Springfield, and they had a new focus.
Handguns.
Right.
Revolvers.
You got it. Specifically, they wanted to make a small, concealable revolver. But the real key was they were all in on this new tech. The rimfire cartridge. They'd gotten a patent on it a couple years earlier.
The rimfire cartridge, we got to dig into this because it keeps coming up. Like, why was it such a big deal?
Okay, so before the rimfire cartridge, loading a gun was a whole ordeal. You had your loose powder, you had your bullet, you had a percussion cap to set it off. Like, it was messy, it was slow, it was unreliable.
Oh, yeah, I can imagine.
But the rimfire cartridge, it was a self-contained unit. It had everything you needed in one little package, like way easier to load, way faster to fire, and a lot more reliable.
So like going from a horse and buggy to a car.
Pretty much. And get this, their revolver was the first one to really make this tech work.
Wow, so they were really on the cutting edge.
Totally. But there's another piece of the puzzle here, and it's a juicy one. It all comes down to a patent, and this guy named Rollin White.
Okay, Rollin White, go on.
So Rollin White, he used to work for Colt, right? And Colt, they had a lot of patents on revolvers, but those patents were starting to expire around 1856.
So the market was opening up.
Exactly. But there was a catch. See, Wesson, he already had this prototype for a cartridge revolver. But there was this one thing they needed, and Rollin White had the patent on it.
What was it?
It was this thing called a bored-through cylinder. Sounds kind of technical, but it was crucial for a cartridge revolver. So you need to load those cartridges from the back of the cylinder.
Okay.
And for that, you need chambers that go all the way through. But the old muzzle-loading revolvers, their cylinders didn't have that.
So they couldn't just make a cartridge revolver without bumping into White's patent.
Nope. They had to play ball. So they did something really smart. They struck a deal with Rollin White. They got an exclusive license to use his design.
Ah, so they paid him, but nobody else could use it.
Exactly. And that was huge. They had to pay him a royalty, like 25 cents for every revolver they made. But it was worth it. They basically had a monopoly on cartridge revolvers for a while.
Like they shut out the competition.
Yeah, nobody else could touch them. And that's a big reason why they became so dominant so quickly.
So you've got the rimfire cartridge, you've got this exclusive patent, and boom, they launched the Model 1.
The one that started it all?
Yeah, tell me about it.
Okay, so the Model 1, it came out in 1857. It was a small 7-shot revolver, used the .22 short cartridge. Now, the .22 short, it might seem kind of weak today, but back then, it was a big deal. Like, way easier and faster to reload than those old muzzle loaders.
Yeah, more shots, less hassle.
Exactly. And the Model 1, it was a huge hit. It really marked the beginning of the end for those old percussion pistols.
And it really took off during the Civil War.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Soldiers, both sides, they loved this thing. It wasn't officially issued, but guys were buying them like crazy. They wanted something reliable, something quick, you know, for personal protection.
I mean, who wouldn't want that in a war?
Right. And Smith & Wesson, they could barely keep up with the demand. They had to build a whole new factory.
Just to keep up with the orders.
Pretty much. And by 1865, they were rolling in dough. More importantly, they were the name in cartridge revolvers. Everyone knew them.
They were like the Apple of guns at the time.
Exactly. But, you know, things change, right? After the Civil War, you had all this expansion out west. And the West, it was a whole different ballgame.
Yeah, different needs, different dangers.
Totally. They needed guns with more power, something that could handle bigger threats, something you could use for hunting, something to keep the peace in a wild territory.
And Smith & Wesson, they picked up on that, didn't they?
They were paying attention, and that's when they came out with the Model 3 American.
The Model 3, yeah, another icon. So what made this one so perfect for the Wild West?
Okay, so the Model 3, it came out in 1870. It was their first big bore revolver, and it had this cool top brake design.
Top brake.
Yeah, so the barrel and cylinder, they hinged downwards. When you opened it, it automatically ejected the spent cartridges.
So super fast reloading.
Way faster than anything else out there. And it was chambered in .44 S&W American.
A lot more stopping power than a .22.
Oh yeah, night and day. But the real game changer was when the U.S. Army adopted it in 1870.
Wow, so they were officially supplying the military now.
Yep. First cartridge revolver to be adopted by the Army. It was a huge validation for Smith & Wesson. Like, the government was saying, this is the good stuff.
That's got to be huge for your reputation.
Totally. And it wasn't just the Army. The Russian Imperial government, they were buying them too. Tons of them.
Really?
Yeah. And they even made a special version for the cavalry, the Schofield model. It had some tweaks suggested by a Major Schofield, just to make it better for mounted troops.
So they were willing to adapt, make custom stuff.
Oh, yeah. They weren't just churning out the same old thing. They were listening to their customers, figuring out what they needed.
And the Model 3, it wasn't just for soldiers and governments, right? It became like a symbol of the Wild West.
Totally. Like, you can't talk about the Wild West without picturing a Model 3. Wyatt Earp, Doc Holliday, Wild Bill Hickok, they all carried one. Even the bad guys. Jesse James, Bob Ford, they had them too.
It's like it was in every gunfight, every saloon.
Pretty much, it was the gun of the era.
So from the Model 1, this little pocket pistol, to the Model 3, this big, powerful gun of the West, they really covered the bases, didn't they?
Yeah, they were hitting all the right notes. But they didn't stop there.
Nope. They kept innovating.
In the late 1800s, people started wanting safer guns, guns that were easier to hide. And that's when they came out with double-action and hammerless revolvers.
So, like, the guns were evolving too, getting more sophisticated.
Absolutely. And some of those designs, they were so good that they're still around today.
Wow, still being made.
Yep, like, they really nailed it. And one of the best examples of that is the .38 military and police revolver. It came out in 1899, and later, in 1957, they renamed it the Model 10.
The Model 10. I feel like everyone's heard of that gun.
Yeah, it's probably the most famous revolver in the world.
Yeah.
And it's been in production for over 100 years.
100 years. So what made this one so special? Why is it such a legend?
Well, for one, it was built like a tank. Super strong, solid frame. And they made it even easier to reload. It had a hand ejector system, so you could pop out the empty cartridges really quick.
Smooth and efficient.
Yeah, and it used the .38 special cartridge.
Another classic.
Oh yeah, .38 special, it was the perfect balance. Not too much recoil, but it packed a punch.
So it was reliable, powerful, and easy to use.
Exactly. And that's why it became the standard gun for cops and soldiers all over the world.
It's like the image you have in your head when someone says police revolver.
Totally. And that just solidified Smith Wesson's place at the top. They weren't just some gun maker, they were the gun maker.
Yeah. So it's really amazing. They started with this crazy lever action pistol, learned from their mistakes, then they came out with the Model 1, then the Model 3, this iconic gun of the West. Then they kept pushing, making safer guns, easier to use, more powerful, and ended up setting the standard for everyone else.
Absolutely. And they didn't just create new guns, they got smart about patents. They knew how to make a lot of guns, good guns, and they were always looking ahead, figuring out what people would need next.
It's like they were masters of the game.
Totally. So what's the big takeaway for you? Like, what's the one thing that really explains their success?
I think for me, it's realizing that they weren't just making guns. They were driving a whole new era of firearms. Like the self-contained cartridge, that was revolutionary.
Right.
And they were leading the charge.
Yeah, I agree. They were pioneers. And they had the smarts to capitalize on it.
Right, the patents, the mass production, all that. But they also didn't get stuck in their ways.
No, they were always adapting. New needs, new customers, new guns.
And they did it all while making some of the most iconic guns in history. Guns that were used by everyone, from soldiers to cowboys to cops. I mean, that's a pretty impressive legacy.
Absolutely. So as we wrap this up, what's something our listeners should think about? Something to chew on.
I'd say, think about this. It might seem like a small thing, but that shift from like the old way of loading guns to using a self-contained cartridge, that changed everything.
It really did.
It changed how wars were fought, how people protected themselves. Like one little change that had a massive ripple effect. And Smith & Wesson, they were right there at the center of it. It makes you wonder what other little changes, in technology or whatever have had that kind of impact, like stuff we don't even think about anymore.
Yeah, that's a good one to ponder.
Definitely. All right, folks, that's our deep dive into Smith & Wesson. Thanks for listening.